I always believed that the future was guaranteed. My parents constantly told me they were saving for my college, that every day they were one step closer to offering me a better life. I grew up with this certainty that when the time for college came, I would have all the financial support I needed to follow my path. It was a silent promise, but it was there, in every conversation, in every glance. I dreamed about it. Then, on the day I received the news that I had been accepted into a prestigious university, my joy couldn't be contained. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of all my struggles. I knew I was finally on the right path, but that same day, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. I was waiting eagerly for the tight hug, the words of pride, the confirmation that my parents were as happy as I was. But what I got was the opposite. My father, without saying more than necessary, told me that the money they had saved for my education had been spent. And not on something big, like a new house or a family trip. No, the money had been used to renovate the kitchen. They replaced the stove, installed a granite countertop, and even added a wine cellar. The years-long dream I had built in my head, the promise of my future, had turned into nothing more than a cold, shiny countertop. I couldn't fully process what I was hearing. But how? The college money, all the effort, everything you promised me? Those words just kept repeating in my head as I tried to understand how this had happened, how after everything I had been through, after everything I had given of myself to have a real chance, could they do this? It wasn't just money. It was my future. I couldn't even look at their faces. It was like they had just slapped me, and I didn't know how to react. My father offered nothing more than a weak apology, as if it were something trivial. And my mother, whom I had always imagined as my biggest supporter, looked at me as if she didn't understand the weight of it all. She justified the expense by saying the kitchen needed renovation, that the house needed improvement, but nothing she said made sense. All I could think was, how could they not care enough to invest in my future? The silence between the three of us was deafening. What shocked me the most wasn't even that they had spent the money, but how they tried to downplay what they had done, as if it were just a matter of priorities, something small. To me, it was betrayal. I looked at them and could no longer see my parents. They were so distant, so absorbed in their own world, that I felt irrelevant, like my dream had just been a passing thought, while their desire for a new kitchen was their real priority. I was in shock, feeling a pain in my chest that suffocated me. I couldn't even process the anger properly. The overwhelming sensation was emptiness. I didn't know where to look, what to do, or what to say. I didn't even know if I should say anything. When my Aunt Laura found out what had happened, it was no surprise that she was furious. Laura had always been a woman who faced hardships, but never let anything stop her from growing. She was successful, had her own business, and always saw potential in me. What my mother and father failed to recognize, Laura always knew, that I had so much more to offer the world. When she learned that the money meant for my future had been spent on a kitchen renovation, she wasn't just indignant, she was livid. I could feel the tension over the phone when she called me, and in that moment, I knew my aunt wasn't the type to accept injustice. She was clear about what she intended to do. I'm going to give you something your parents couldn't. I'll help you secure your future, but in a way they'd never imagine. Laura didn't offer money, a simple check, or any ordinary financial aid. That wasn't her goal. Instead, she gave me something far more valuable, a chance. She arranged an interview for me at one of her business partners' firms, a major company in the city. The opportunity seemed like a distant dream, but there it was, right in front of me, a door opening to something I had never imagined. On top of that, Laura offered me something I didn't even know existed, a partial scholarship, a chance to continue my studies, and, who knows, go even further. She knew I needed more than just financial support. She wanted to give me a way to rebuild myself and show the world, and especially my parents, that I didn't need them to move forward. I didn't need them to achieve what I knew I was capable of. And most importantly, I would do it without asking anyone for anything. The internship began, and as I adjusted to the new environment, the reality that I was far from everything I knew, from the comfort of home, hit me. But instead of letting insecurity take over, I found strength in that discomfort. I was working alongside incredible people, but I also felt like I was, competing against myself the whole time. The pressure was immense. Yet something inside me told me I had to give my best, not just to please others, but to prove to myself that I was capable. Every task seemed harder than the last, but somehow I managed. Each time I overcame a challenge, I felt a small relief, as if I were finally on the right path. I couldn't afford to make silly mistakes anymore. This internship wasn't just about gaining professional experience, it was about my personal redemption, about turning the pain of betrayal into fuel to keep moving forward. My Aunt Laura supported me steadily through this process, but always kept the right distance. She gave me practical advice and guidance, but never treated me like a child. She knew that if I were to learn anything, I had to do it on my own. She was pushing me into reality while showing me that I was capable of facing whatever came my way. When I received my first internship evaluation, I was surprised. Not because the feedback was bad. On the contrary, they praised my performance. The shock was realizing that, in such a short time, I had already achieved more than I thought possible. They were starting to see me as someone with a future, someone who, despite his humble origins, had a lot to offer. Something inside me began to shift. I no longer needed my parents' validation. I was already writing my own story, one step at a time. As time passed, the pressure of the internship became a natural part of my daily life. I was learning not just about business, but also about how to handle my own emotions. Every email, every meeting, every task made me grow more, made me realize I was stronger than I thought. I was beginning to build a confidence I had never had before. It wasn't just about the work itself, but about understanding that I was in control of my life. I no longer needed to rely on others to decide my fate. At home, my relationship with my parents slowly deteriorated. There were no more warm conversations, no more pride in seeing their son achieve his goals. They tried, of course, but it felt so artificial. I didn't want that anymore. I didn't want to keep trying to please them, to seek their approval. They had already shown me what they truly thought about my future. Now, I was creating my own future, without them. It was when I truly realized I had changed, that I was at a turning point, that I received a call from my mother. She told me she was sorry for making that decision, but her tone was empty, devoid of genuine remorse. She said the words, but they carried no weight. She mentioned how regretful she was, and that if she could go back, she'd do things differently. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. I knew that even though she wanted to apologize, she couldn't grasp the impact it had on me. The pain of being neglected, the pain of realizing that, deep down, my dream wasn't important enough to them. But at the same time, something surprised me. Instead of feeling anger or sadness, I felt nothing. It wasn't indifference, just blankness. I no longer wanted their validation. I no longer needed it. The internship was just the beginning. As the months passed, the opportunity my Aunt Laura had given me turned into something much bigger than I had imagined. I was promoted, and doors to new opportunities began opening. The scholarship, which had seemed like a distant gift, became a crucial pillar for my academic and professional growth. I was in control now. The feeling of building my future with my own hands was indescribable. I didn't depend on anyone else to achieve my goals. Over time, I distanced myself even further from my old life. The emotional gap with my parents widened, but instead of missing them, I began to feel a kind of relief. They had never given me the right tools to move forward, and now I was finding my own path, even if it meant letting go of what I once thought was an unbreakable bond of love and support. And then, the unexpected visit happened. My mother showed up at my apartment one day unannounced. I knew she wanted to apologize, but I was already prepared for it. She tried to explain, saying the house renovation had been a necessity, that she truly believed it would improve the family's life. I don't know why, but something in that explanation made me feel a wave of compassion, as if, for a moment, I saw my mother not as the woman who betrayed me, but as someone still trying to find her way. She started talking about the mistakes she had made and how guilty she felt for not doing better by me. I realized that, deep down, she was also lost. But now there was no way to undo what had happened. I didn't want this kind of apology anymore. What I really needed from her was a different kind of action, not empty words. But still, I listened. I listened to everything. Not because I wanted to, but because I was no longer bound by that pain. I had reached a point where her guilt no longer had power over me. Time passed, and my relationship with my parents took on a different shape. It was no longer about seeking approval, but about rebuilding trust. I was at a point where I no longer cared what they thought. What mattered was that I knew what I had achieved, and that nothing, no one, could take that away from me. But deep down, a part of me still wondered how things had gotten to this point. How, after everything, I still felt like I needed something more from them. The answer was simple. I didn't need anything. I was already making things happen on my own. With every victory, no matter how small, I reminded myself that I was in control of my own life. That was something I had never felt before, and it seemed like, finally, I was on the right path. Even if my relationship with them would never be the same, it didn't mean there was no love left. It just meant I was learning to love myself in a way I never had before. What my mother didn't know was that while she was trying to redeem herself, I had already left behind the version of me that needed validation. I was no longer the same boy who believed in her promises. The version of me she knew had transformed into something stronger, more independent. I no longer depended on empty promises or apologies to move forward. The internship, the opportunities my aunt gave me, the lessons I learned along the way, all of it made me realize that true overcoming wasn't about winning their approval, but about becoming someone capable of achieving everything I dreamed of, alone. And that, deep down, gave me a relief I never imagined. Relief because, finally, I was free. Free to be who I was, to make my own choices. Choices that were mine and mine alone. Life went on, and things became clearer as I moved forward. I was in college, balancing studies with the internship, and over time, I gained more ground within the company. But more importantly, I was gaining something I never thought possible. Respect. The respect I had once sought from my parents now came from colleagues and superiors. The feeling of being seen as capable, as someone who knew what he was doing, gave me strength every day. Even if my parents tried to reconnect, even if my mother kept trying to make me feel like she was the only one who could help me, I knew my real support came from within. That was liberating. I no longer had to fight for something to be given to me. I knew I could achieve everything on my own. And with every small victory, every step forward in the internship, every exam I passed in college, I felt closer to becoming the person I had always wanted to be, but once thought I couldn't be. I still remember the first time my mother called me after some time. She told me she was proud of me, that she finally recognized how much I had grown and achieved. Her reaction, though still lacking true remorse, was a milestone for me. Not because she approved of me, but because in a way I could see she was trying. She was starting to understand how much I had grown and how little I depended on her to feel fulfilled. It was a strange feeling, almost like closure. I no longer felt anger or sadness, just a kind of understanding I hadn't had before. That, truly, was overcoming. I had moved past the need for their validation. Now, I saw myself as someone who had found his own strength and direction. Now, even as my life took a direction I never imagined, echoes of the past remained, always present in some part of me. There were moments when I caught myself wondering what my life would have been like if my mother had truly invested in my future, if she had supported me the way I had always dreamed. But the truth was that if no longer mattered. I was finally building my own future. I was becoming the person I wanted to be. Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson came from what had been taken from me. I learned to rely on myself, to not wait for others to fulfill empty promises. Life isn't fair. Things don't always happen as we expect, but my ability to handle it, to overcome, was what made me grow. Without realizing it, my Aunt Laura had been the catalyst for that. She showed me that when everything seems lost, you can turn pain into motivation and keep moving forward. When I finally secured a permanent position at the company where I interned, it was a sign that what I had overcome wasn't in vain. I no longer needed external validation. I knew my worth, and that was enough. It was. Around that same time that, by chance, I found a letter my mother had written to me when I was accepted into college. She had never given it to me, perhaps because she knew that back then I still believed in her words. When I read it, I understood that she had truly loved me, but her love had never been enough to give me what I really needed. Real support, trust in myself. Instead of blaming myself for it, instead of letting it shake me further, I decided to use it as another piece of my learning. The letter no longer caused me pain. It reminded me of everything I had overcome, of how arduous my journey had been, but it also made me see how much I had achieved on my own. What moved me most wasn't the words in the letter, but the fact that I no longer missed the support I once thought was essential for my success. I was responsible for my own life, and that had never been clearer to me than in that moment. I didn't know exactly when, but something inside me had changed, irreversibly. As time passed, I realized that everything that had happened, the blow of their lack of support, the anger, the pain, was fading into the past. It was no longer about what my mother had or hadn't done. What mattered now was that I was building a solid life with my own hands, with the support of people who truly believed in me, like my Aunt Laura. I realized I didn't need their approval to be someone of value. It was a feeling of relief and freedom, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. I was beginning to create my own identity, outside the shadow of my family's expectations. Success, which once seemed dependent on others' promises, was now in my hands, and that gave me indescribable confidence. Over time, I realized that success wasn't just about work or academic results, but about how I saw myself as someone capable. I had overcome one of the biggest disappointments of my life, and now, looking back, no longer caused pain. I knew I had learned more from that experience than I ever would have from an easy victory. Today, when I think about everything I went through, I can clearly see that the real victory wasn't making my mother realize her mistake. The real victory was me realizing that, on my own, I was capable of building my own future. The pain of being rejected, the disappointment of being ignored by my own parents, all of it was just a lesson that, in the end, made me stronger, more resilient. What my mother never understood was that by taking away my ability to depend on them, she had given me the greatest lesson of all, the importance of being self-sufficient. With each passing day, I grew further away from the Jason who still expected something from my parents. Of course, they tried in various ways to reconnect and show remorse. My mother, in particular, began sending more frequent messages, asking how I was doing and trying to salvage some of the relationship we once had. But no matter how much I still loved them, things would never be the same. It wasn't about forgiveness, I had already forgiven, but about change. What sustained me was no longer their love, but the respect I had earned for myself. I no longer felt the need to seek external validation. I knew what I had achieved and what I was still capable of achieving. Those apologies and attempts to reconnect, though sincere, no longer carried the weight they once had. I had already freed myself from that emotional burden, and slowly, they were beginning to understand that. When my mother reached out to say she was proud of me, I didn't know exactly how to feel. It was a different kind of pride, because now I no longer needed her to say it. I knew my pride didn't depend on her recognition. I didn't need her to validate what I had accomplished. I had already been through so much to get where I was that there was no more room for insecurity or doubt. I was creating my own life, free from the chains that had once bound me. When I saw how my relationship with my parents had transformed, I realized that overcoming wasn't about defeating others, but about defeating the limitations we place on ourselves. I no longer felt like the disregarded son. I was someone capable of making a difference, with or without their support. I still hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of what had happened. It was as if part of me was still trying to understand why. Why had my mother done what she did? Why hadn't she seen what was at stake? But over time, those questions began to disappear. Not because I had answered them, but because I realized I didn't need answers. As I moved forward, I understood more and more that not being supported by her wasn't a reflection of my lack of worth. On the contrary, it was an opportunity to discover my own strength. I learned that, in the end, every decision we make is our own. I was no longer waiting for external validation, because I had learned that the only validation that truly matters is the one that comes from within. Looking back and seeing how much I had grown gave me a sense of fulfillment no approval could ever give. I remember one specific moment when my Aunt Laura asked me how I felt about everything. I told her I felt good, but with a lingering trace of doubt. She looked at me and, with a calm smile, said something that stayed with me. Doubt is normal. What matters is that you now know how strong you are, and nothing will stop you. In that moment, I realized that despite all the hardships, there was a strength inside me I had never recognized before. Overcoming wasn't about retaliating or proving something to others, but about moving forward day after day with courage. And slowly, the weight of disappointment was replaced by a lightness I hadn't known was possible. I was ready for whatever came next. I was ready to be the best version of myself. Today, looking back, I see myself as someone who, despite everything, managed to turn great pain into something positive. I could never have imagined being able to rise again in such a powerful way. The Jason my parents knew, the one who depended on them and expected something in return, no longer existed. And as painful as the process of change had been, I was grateful for everything I had experienced. That betrayal, that disappointment, led me down a path I would never have taken otherwise. I no longer needed their approval because, in the end, the person who mattered most was me. I was responsible for my own success. The most remarkable thing about all of this was that, throughout the process, I hadn't lost the essence of who I was. I had only become stronger, more secure, more aware of my own capabilities. And that's what defines me now. I won't lie. Sometimes I still catch myself reflecting on what my life would have been like if things had happened differently. But at the same time, I feel at peace. The anger I once felt toward my mother and father had been replaced by understanding. It wasn't that I had forgotten what happened, but I understood that what mattered now was the person I had become. And deep down, they had also learned an important lesson, not just about money or missed opportunities, but about how crucial it is to support others in the right way. They didn't fully grasp the impact their lack of support had on me, but I knew that, in some way, our relationship had transformed into something more genuine. I was no longer waiting for something from them. I had found my own path. And maybe that was life's greatest gift to me. In the end, what truly remained was a sense of freedom. It wasn't about achieving what others expected of you or proving something to those who disappointed you. The real victory was when I realized I didn't need anyone to achieve what I wanted. Of course, my Aunt Laura had been pivotal in this journey, but what she gave me wasn't just a job opportunity or financial help. She gave me the confidence to believe I could make things happen on my own. She helped me see my potential when I was blinded by frustration. And while my relationship with my mother and father would never be the same, I was grateful for everything I had been through, because without it, I would never have known the strength that existed within me. Today, I can say I am the person I always wanted to be, someone who doesn't depend on anyone to achieve his goals. That's the part that still leaves me speechless, because no matter how much I achieved, I could never have done it without first facing what seemed like an insurmountable mountain. And looking back, the most remarkable thing isn't how much I managed to accomplish, but how much I grew in such a short time. I never imagined that one day I'd be able to look in the mirror and say, I did it. And the truth is, even now, when I face difficult moments, it's that overcoming that guides me. Every challenge is a chance to remind myself that I've already conquered far more than I thought possible. So yes, today I am a new person. No longer the son waiting for support. I'm the guy who learned to walk on his own 2 feet and, more importantly, to never let anyone else define what I can or cannot be. Sometimes, I think everything that happened was a kind of blessing in disguise. Because without that pain, without the disappointment of having my trust broken, I would never have discovered how strong I truly am. I had to lose to gain. I saw myself in a moment of total vulnerability, but I also realized that vulnerability isn't weakness. On the contrary, it gave me the courage to look inward and see that I had everything I needed to move forward. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but the journey made me who I am today. Someone who doesn't let anything or anyone bring him down. And though the path was twisted, I can say with absolute certainty that I've never felt more complete than I do now, with everything I've achieved on my own. Today, I look at my mother and father and see different people. They too have changed, and I know that in some way they finally understood the impact of the choices they made. But most importantly, I've learned not to depend on them to define my worth. Deep down, we've all grown. Me, because I learned to be self-sufficient and to value myself. Them, because they had to face the consequences of their actions. This isn't a story of revenge or hatred, but one of overcoming and learning. And in the end, I can only look back and feel gratitude. Gratitude for having been able to move forward, to grow, and to not let anything or anyone define me. I was my own redemption. If this story hit you in any way, don't leave without subscribing to the channel. There's so much more coming. Real stories of resilience, unexpected turns, and inner strength. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and drop a comment telling us how it made you feel. Your support helps this content reach more people who need the strength to rise again.